we are PieSync. We make an intelligent two-way sync. We have been working with SharpSpring actually for quite some time already. We sell a standalone product that enables customers, if they do any Google search of contacts, two-way sync, SharpSpring, and they type in any other tool, they would land on landing pages like these, where they can set up a PieSync account on their own. But now we have gone in-app with you guys, and I do want to show you how that works, some use cases, and how you can troubleshoot. So that's the idea. This is what the in-app will look like, but I will jump inside your platform immediately. I'm speaking to you from beautiful Ghent, Belgium, which is where all of PieSync is located. So we are a little company. This is actually all of my colleagues. This is me. My role is sales engineer, although most of PieSync actually does sell itself. It's a very self-service program. We are currently, how many people is this? 20 or so, but in quite fast expansion at that. When is PieSync to be used? PieSync is, as I mentioned, a two-way contacts syncing app. I cannot stress this enough. We sync contacts. Whenever you would find customers in need of integrating or searching like a complete integration of two platforms, that basically sometimes they want to mirror two apps. That's not really what we're after. We want to sort of unify the contacts, the CRM, right? The CRM contacts book across the whole software stack that any company may be using. A lot of it is attached to a contact. Invoices are attached to a contact. Deals are attached to a contact. The contact, the customer, the subscriber in an email list, the customer in a Shopify instance, that's the nucleus, right? It all revolves around the customer. So that's why we decided to sync the contact object and objects related to that contact object. We built, this is from our sales deck. I just wanted to introduce this slide in here. We made PieSync to help customers who are always struggling with manual import exports. So you will need PieSync when you want to establish this live link between two connections. So we retail our product as, and we call it PieSync. In the SharpSpring environment, it's called App Connections. And at first I found that name a bit odd, but the more I come to play with the SharpSpring's implementation of PieSync, the more it makes sense. It's essentially, yeah, a live connection to another app. Who can use this? Who can go inside the SharpSpring environment and set up such app connections? Well, currently it's something that's reserved to administrators, because I do suppose because it is a paying service. I will show you the impact of costs in a minute. So I have created a test user for myself, gave that person a sales role, and I was not able to access app connections whatsoever. What does it cost? Well, let's actually jump inside an environment which I have received from one of your colleagues. I've already set up a couple of app connections, and you can already see the cost right there. This is per connected service. So each one of these lines, which is essentially an app connection, it's essentially me deciding, you know what, I have a bunch of contacts in my SharpSpring. These need to be in two-way sync with a personal contacts book that I have in Google Contacts. I imagine somebody else has an iCloud, doesn't use Google Contacts, but he has an iCloud list of contacts. That's also one connection. Each connection gives you sort of the right to sync 100,000 contacts. Now, a connection can carry more than 100,000 contacts if that should be needed. It's just that then the price will double for that single connection. You will see in a minute that an app connection is not a very simple two-way all-to-all sync. It's not that everybody who is currently in this contact environment, let me actually just jump inside here so that you can you guys get a feel of what my contact list looks like. I believe it, yeah, so as you can see, it has 6,806 contacts in there, which is already the result of some syncs that I have had going on. There might be lists in here. You don't necessarily need all of those contacts on your phone, for instance. You don't necessarily need to send those contacts to another app. That's one use case of a sync connection, sending SharpSpring contacts out to other apps. If you are new to SharpSpring and your contact list is quite empty, there's also other use cases of sending contacts into SharpSpring. I will go over some of these connections here, and basically I will show you the interface, but also talk around what could be a use case. At the end, there will be plenty of time for questions. The most basic use case, the original use case that we developed PieSync for, is syncing to Google Contacts. It's very commonly used. This is my Google Contacts, where I have a whole bunch of contacts that I have personally gathered, which it may be handy to have them to send them over to SharpSpring. Typically, it's also the other way around. If I can manage to get to people who are currently in SharpSpring, and I can get them into my personal Rolodex, which is Google Contacts, which in turn is synced up to my telephone, that means if somebody calls me on my phone, and I have suddenly caller ID on my phone because my phone recognizes who's calling me, because that information comes from SharpSpring. This is what a connection may look like. I've already tweaked it a little bit. By default, you would start off with this. If a contact's in Google, send it to SharpSpring. If a contact's in SharpSpring, send it to my Google. But that's actually very rarely the case that you will want this. So you can apply filters. If it's in Google, and in Google, I play around with groups. You can apply tags in Google Contacts. This is obviously going to be different in iCloud. In iCloud, you have folders. We also support Outlook 365, where you can play around with categories and folders. So these filter operators kind of change. I want to say that if I have a contact in SharpSpring, only then I will want this contact in SharpSpring. If you then activate this connection and it's actually already running, but that's fine, you can make these tweaks as you go along. If you're adding an action to this, this will enable you to not have that contact just drop inside SharpSpring as an orphaned contact. You can immediately apply ownership, because since these are contacts that I have now in my phone and they are not yet in SharpSpring, in that case, let's have them also be immediately set to my name. I know that there is already contact in SharpSpring. If I launch this connection, PieSync is going to look for people that I would already have. It's not going to recreate them. It's going to use the email address to find contacts that already exist on my Google Contacts. But when it's moving them into Google Contacts, I just want to also make sure that I put them in that specific group that I have created for that purpose, so that I know when a contact is coming in from SharpSpring. This, what I'm showing you here, is what we've also put in the knowledge base article. This is the typical use case of setting up an app connection. I'll just walk you through the rest of a sync setup, and then we will go over some other use cases, because PieSync enables you to do much more cooler stuff than just this. We've just defined which contacts should be synced and what should happen when they are the object of a sync. You can have some more tweaks here. This is an option that you cannot turn off. It's mandatory. We use actually the email address as a unique reference to, as a unique key to set up a sync. This option here is for conflicting changes. Remember, I'm setting up a sync and there's an initial state which won't be in equilibrium. I have contacts in Google. I have possibly some of them the same identical contacts in SharpSpring, but that's not necessarily the case. So what if we do have some contacts that already exist on both sides, and they should happen to have different different phone numbers attached to them, or a different name? Since we are going to match them up, and in a sync, we are going to move towards a state of equilibrium, we define at one point here in time what information to keep moving forward. After the initial sync, obviously, we are in a state of equilibrium. There won't be any differences anymore, but this is really to indicate which information you find currently more correct. Depending on the app that you are selecting, in this case, Google Contacts, there is this specific notion of a My Contacts group in Google Contacts, which is specifically the group that syncs to your iPhone. So I'm getting this one, I'm leaving this one checked on. SharpSpring unsubscribes. You can, if people unsubscribe in SharpSpring, we can automatically attach a tag in Google Contacts. You can also try to reproduce this in a rule, and I'll show you that in a minute. A contact in Google is not exactly the same as a contact in SharpSpring, but they do share a lot of common fields. And in the default field mapping, it looks like you could change these or move these around, but you cannot. This is basically where we've looked at all the different apps that you can choose from, and we've defined a default field mapping. We don't require our customers to match up phone with phone anymore. This is all done for them. But then as I continue scrolling, we get to a piece which we call customizable field mapping. This is where I have a specific field in SharpSpring, which is called industry. I'm actually not sure whether this is the default field or a custom field. Either way, if you have a field that you've set up in SharpSpring, you can match that up to a corresponding field in Google Contacts. If it doesn't exist yet, you can just create it on the go. It's really to ensure that you have as much as information communicate across these apps as possible. That's the example of a typical sync setup. By the way, adding a new connection, you'll see how this actually opens up a new, it's all happening in iframe. This is all happening in my things. This is a bit unfortunate. Apparently I've been testing around a lot today. The rate limit for one of your accounts has been reached. I do hope I can still access the other ones. Let's see if I can still access this one here. Cool, I can still access them. There is no surprise hidden behind this add connection screen, by the way. The only, the screen that's hiding behind add connection is essentially this list here. It looks like a scrollable list where we basically ask the end user to click on the app that he would like to connect his contacts to. Once you click on it, you have to identify yourself in that app. That's sometimes providing an API key. Sometimes it's a matter of logging into that respective platform. I already wanted to do that prior to connecting to you guys, but apparently I've now hit a rate limit by having tested too much. Sorry for that. It actually was working prior to talking to you guys. I do believe the knowledge base article has the exact screenshot of what happens, or feel free to just try it out. Here we're looking at a totally different use case of setting up a connection. Here we're looking at Shopify, which is a tool hopefully you know well. It's you can set up your own storefront. This is the use case of having customers trickle into SharpSpring. If somebody enters Shopify, so a new customer gets created, you can have that person automatically added to your SharpSpring contact list. You don't necessarily therefore need contacts that already exist in SharpSpring. You don't necessarily need them into Shopify. In this case, I'm just, that's why I'm actually going to delete this rule. I just need contacts that are in Shopify. As soon as somebody makes a purchase, I want that person in SharpSpring. And a lot of our customers, including those that already are using the SharpSpring connector in our standalone platform, don't often play around with these rules. They essentially just need the contact sync. But we do want to we urge people to set up those segmentation rules, because they essentially turn PieSync into a cross of PieSync and Zapier. If you know Zapier, it's that if this then that type formula, where all of a sudden you can keep states in sync. What do I mean by state? If a contact is in Shopify, don't just in a dumb way move over the contact and put it in SharpSpring. SharpSpring has a lot of, well, actually already Shopify has a lot of information attached to that contact. As you're doing a checkout on your storefront, Shopify by default asks for an opt-in. Now that's really important information to leverage as well in SharpSpring. So if a contact's in Shopify and they have opted in, move them into SharpSpring. But what can we do as they are being moved into SharpSpring? Well, for one, we can assign them to a campaign, for instance. We can assign them for a campaign. In this case, it could be a direct sale through Shopify. We could also attach them to a list, add them to a list. If they, for instance, stay, if they opt out, if we know from their Shopify behavior that they don't accept marketing, you could add them, for instance, to a do not send list, right? Do not send list if you were to create such a list. I don't have any lists here, but you can refresh the rules, create one in SharpSpring, refresh this page. Actually, you don't have to necessarily need to refresh this. If you go back to this page, it'll already have been refreshed. As you're setting up rules, a lot of the time, PieSync is helping the end user by setting up the inverse rule. If changes are being made, so this is actually also making the other rule. So if you are accepting marketing, we would remove them from the do not send list. We're also making rules in the other way around. A lot of this enables a lot of our users to set up very creative features. This part of a sync setup will very often change. The rest is always the same, as you can see. Pipedrive is an example of a CRM. This is where you could have SharpSpring send contacts over into Pipedrive, and the other way around. If a contact in Pipedrive has deals, that could update a lead status with qualified leads to qualified lead. But if in Pipedrive that contact still has no deals, it should remain an unqualified lead. If you have a contact in Pipedrive and there's some won deals attached to it, so this is very much the case of a company using Pipedrive as their main CRM and SharpSpring on the side. I'm sure you guys are aware that companies not always use exclusively SharpSpring, right? There's always a golden combination of apps that companies tend to be using. In this case, we're making them a contact, and it's keeping this in complete sync. The other way around, keeping ownership in sync is something that we come across often. So if you have a set of users in a SharpSpring environment, and some of those users are also in sync in the other app, you do want to make sure that you don't just send over contacts, but you also keep them in sync in terms of ownership. And this is another way. This comes with the other way around toggle. So wherever you're changing the owner, it will be kept in sync. This one is a typical one where you are having SharpSpring calculate lead scores and setting up SharpSpring as a lead qualifier. So if you are only wanting, and this would be, you would remove all of the other rules and you just have this rule in place. SharpSpring is measuring the activity of leads, and only when they are active enough, then are they being pushed to Pipedrive, in which case they are also being put in a general leads queue, for instance. This is something that actually comes from my previous company. We were using a different set of tools, but if we had this in my previous company, I would have been a happy man. once you've set up a rule and you are in such a screen here, you can always go back to a dashboard where you can have an overview of what's happened so far. Now, this actually didn't sync too many contacts yet. Let me show you what's this Google Contact Sync has been up for a longer time. So let me show you what the activity log looks like. The activity log, as you can see, it's clearly showing me that rate limit error. We are actually still fine-tuning this. I'm a bit of an edge case today, to be perfectly honest with you guys. I have set up quite a lot of app connections. We should not expect this to be happening to the customers. But the activity log essentially shows me, as I'm setting up a sync, a real-time view of what's happening on both sides, depending on how I've set up this sync. It shows you an historical log of contacts being created. So yesterday, contacts got created in SharpSpring because I had consciously added contacts in Google Contacts, which triggered these contacts to be created in SharpSpring. Updates happened because maybe in my SharpSpring, I was making some changes, and those changes trickled through to my Google Contacts. Also, Google Contacts got created because somebody added a whole bunch of contacts to SharpSpring. So I have an overview of what's happening here. This overview is actually going to get a little bit of an overhaul in the next couple of weeks. We're going to include more information. We're going to include also those contacts that didn't sync. That didn't sync because you had set up rules that prevented some contacts to be synced. We're going to show you which contacts didn't sync because in one app it was a contact that didn't carry a first name, and if you were to be syncing to Pipedrive or perhaps SharpSpring as well, a first name might be a required field. So that's preventing us to sync some contacts. We're all going to show this in this dashboard. This is also the place where you can pause a sync should you want to make some more drastic changes. All that's happening from within the iframe. Now your environment, the SharpSpring environment, also gives you these controls, right? It gives you the control to jump inside that iframe or to go ahead and delete an active connection. You can monitor the state of a sync with the status field here. I wanted to go over these use cases, the use case of a contact sync, personal Rolodex to SharpSpring, and a CRM sync, as well as e-commerce sync. Those are the three main use cases that we see around PieSync. I am more than happy to go over some questions. We covered the price. If you need any help, we've already Greg already crafted a great knowledge-based article, and that's still being worked on. Now, I was actually wondering, what tools do you guys have, right? This is basically a question that I would ask to you guys. We have a possibility of impersonating customers. So if you want to check out what a sync looks like from a particular customer's perspective, we have the possibility to impersonate that user. And if you guys have that possibility as well, that should enable you to jump inside a customer's app connection to check out the settings of that sync. Is that a possibility that you guys have? This is a question to you guys.
Yeah, Franz, so we have the ability to go into our clients' instances and test all that good stuff, and we do have a staging environment as well right now that we'll be able to test all this stuff in.